Consumers are streaming online to buy goods and services as people avoid crowds due to the coronavirus outbreak. However, distribution of the commodities is becoming a huge challenge due to restrictions put in place to curb the spread of the disease. Brenda Kerubo spoke to Richard Ho, the CEO of Africa Logistics Properties, on this week's Captains of Industry. Take a look.
Hugh is the CEO of Africa Logistics Properties. ALP is a local company that specializes in developing modern distribution centers and industrial warehouses. Richard has 14 years' experience in project structures, legal agreements and warehouse facilities in Kenya, Russia and the United Kingdom.
The pandemic has disrupted logistics in various ways. I think it was an initial brutal shock to the whole supply chain because everything stopped moving, and whereas business has focused for decades on sort of just-in-time type logistics where everything was reduced down to working on basically on an efficient but as lower cost basis as possible. When that shock initially hit, all those models fell apart.
How exactly do we cope then with these disruptions?
Well, I think by holding more stock, by concentrating on having redundancies in their supply chain. So it's not enough now just to source all of one vital component from one location. So because if that location becomes locked down or disrupted in some other way, or the shipping assets are out of line, then your entire supply chain collapses. So people are looking at holding more inventory. They're looking at sourcing material from different locations. So all of that makes supply chain more complicated and slightly more expensive to run.
Even as the pandemic has quite disrupted the logistics business, but it has also created opportunities. Which are some of these?
Well, I think it's almost become a cliche now to say that e-commerce has been accelerated by the pandemic. So when it comes to an end, we will see how much shopping patterns and business-to-business patterns have changed permanently and how much of that will change back.
Will we ever go back to pre-pandemic levels?
No, I think events like this change the world forever. In some ways, you know, in bad ways, but in some ways in good ways. But I think business in terms of digitization, in terms of e-commerce, in terms of online retail, I think some of those changes are with us forever. And I think business travel will be disrupted. I think people will, it's not necessarily a default that you get on a plane and go to a meeting anymore. Can I do this on Zoom? Do I really need to go? Sometimes you need to go. There are some meetings you have to have face-to-face. There are some business deals you need to close and you need to go, but you don't need to go all the time. So business travel will probably never be quite the same. E-commerce will definitely be accelerated. So I don't think you ever go back to the way it was before entirely.
When you look at the market, what worries you and what excites you the most?
I think what excites me most are those changes around e-commerce and changing the supply chain. And from our business, in terms of providing warehousing space and providing those high-quality buildings that enable e-commerce, obviously for us as a business, that's very exciting. I think it's exciting for Kenya and for East Africa as well, because actually if it accelerates the adoption of a more efficient, digitized supply chain, that actually cuts down costs for businesses, which means it cuts down costs for consumers. So, part of the reason that goods cost so much in East Africa is because logistics costs historically been very high. So if the pandemic permanently accelerates Kenya towards a more efficient supply chain, then ultimately that benefits all Kenyans, all consumers. What worries me, I guess, is if you get a collapse in international trade, if people become much more protectionist, because that drives up the cost of goods. So what you don't want is the temporary restrictions that you see in place during the pandemic becoming super permanent. And I think you get some misallocations of capital. So if, for instance, you make a decision that every country must have a manufacturing capability for PPE, it sounds like a rational response, but is it really? Because for 99% of the time that manufacturing space will actually be completely underutilised. The more efficient solution might be to actually make a decision to build a warehouse and hold 6 months stock of PPE, which you then buy, hold in one place. And that's a much lower cost solution for a government than building a whole manufacturing base that is completely underutilised. So I worry about those protectionist misallocation of capital problems that might occur.
What's the best career advice that you've ever received?
Is to understand yourself in terms of your personal strengths and your personal weaknesses, and to select your team around that to a certain extent. So understand what you can do and what your team can do around you, and don't try to do those things you're bad at. Do the things you're good at, and recruit a team around you that will work around you and your business's strengths, I think.